Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with historythroughcards.com. Hope you're all doing very well today. Today I want to tell you about Johnny Bench, and I have a couple of his cards that I want to show you and a couple of articles too when he got into the Hall of Fame in 1989. I thought these were really interesting articles, and I didn't know a whole lot about Johnny Bench growing up. I knew the name, obviously, and he was, well, I was around when he retired, but I never saw him play. So, I just figured that, well, he's very popular, and I want to add a card or two of his to my collection. And so when I was a kid, I went to Hall's auction and I ended up grabbing his 1968 rookie, and he actually has another rookie out there as well. It's much rarer and very expensive, and that's his 1968 Cons Wieners. I think that card can go for over $1,000 now. It's very nice too. I actually enjoy it, but I really like this card as well. And this was not all that expensive when I got it at auction, but I was really surprised, in fact, to pick up Johnny Bench's rookie. And this card actually, and his 1969, which I'll show you in a minute, this card was very expensive at one point in time. And I'll show you the back of it. It's, again, not not the greatest looking thing in the world. It's obviously really off center, 95.5 if that. But these cards were actually really expensive when I was growing up as a kid, and the 69 as well. I actually prefer the 69 a little bit more so, and it's because it's his first uh, card that he's owned. So not a bad looking card. I really like this card, and it's a very popular card as well of Johnny Bench. And I went to look to see how much those two cards were going for when Johnny Bench was going into the Hall of Fame in 1989. And according to my notes here, uh, in the December, actually, let's start out with the March. In the March 1989 issue of Beckett magazine, the 1968 rookie was going for $200, and that's the 2023 equivalent of $495.24. And at the time, his 1969 tops, number 95, was going for $70, and that was the equivalent in 2023 of $173.34. And then in the December 1992 issue of Beckett magazine, the 1968 rookie, number 247, was going for 275, which in 2023 is the equivalent of $601.85. And his 1969 tops was going for 165 in December of 1992, which is the 2023 equivalent of $361.11. Now, obviously, if you're like 10, 11, 12 years old, as I was back in like 1989 or so, uh, that was a very unaffordable card. But a lot of collectors who were going for those cards actually saw Johnny Bench play, and that's why the cards were going for so much. Plus, he was going into the Hall of Fame as well in 1989. Even so, they were um, they were probably overpriced at that point in time anyway, as a lot of the cards were in the 1980s and early 1990s, and that's because of speculators. And we know this because of the articles at the time were saying that there were a lot of speculators coming into the hobby and jacking up all the prices of the cards, and um, it made it for regular collectors that couldn't afford these cards really angry, and they expressed their anger uh, through the newspapers and not just Beckett, because unfortunately, as great a memory I have of Beckett, they seem to kind of gloss over uh, the negative aspects of the hobby at that time. And so you're getting really kind of like a one-sided deal in the hobby with Beckett because at the time Beckett was the most trusted source of hobby information, as was SCD, Sports Collectors Digest, and um, both of these magazines were well, they were kind of like the Wall Street Journal for the hobby at the time, and now we don't really have either of these magazines. They don't really play a valuable role as they once did. And it's well, so I mean the media today. So they were really the media of the hobby, right? The watchdogs, if you will, of the hobby back in the 1980s, 90s, and so that has really gone away, and it's now kind of up to collectors on platforms like YouTube and other maybe a few other sources to keep things kind of honest. And that's really my one of my biggest concerns with Beckett. Now I do like Beckett, and I think they had a great place in the hobby at one point in time. Uh, were they perfect? Absolutely not. You don't get perfection in man, so you strive for it, and the same with the media. Although I would say that we don't really have a decent media anymore. It's um it's something that is not taught, and you need to teach people to be honest in the media. But Beckett tried its best. It's really kind of interesting too that uh, at the time in the hobby in 1990, 1989, 1992, 1993, that the hobby was going through a series of mini crashes. Nothing goes to zero, but it was you could tell the trend was going down, and it was up for a long time, and nothing can stay up forever. Absolutely nothing. The economy or the hobby, whatever the case may be, it's not realistic. What a lot of people don't realize is that the hobby started to have a course correction prior to the strike in 1994, and it looks like it was late 1991 through 1992, and it coincides with the hockey strike. And hockey had two strikes, 1992 and one in 1994 95, along with the baseball strike. And you see this in the Beckett's at the time, and they don't really talk about this, but you can see it in the pricing. And if you want to actually know what's going on in the hobby, you have to go through the mainstream media at the time that were picking up articles. So that's one thing. And then Johnny Bench and Yaz getting into the Hall of Fame at the same time. They're first ballot Hall of Famers. You could make an argument that Yaz was not a first ballot Hall of Famer. I try that all the time. I'm not the biggest fan of Yaz in the world, but he actually has a fairly decent amount to say about Johnny Bench getting into the Hall of Fame, and I'm going to share that with you right now. This is from the Dayton Daily News, Dayton, Ohio, January 10th, 1989. Yaz knew that Bench was special, and so was Yastrzemski. 20 years ago, Carl Yastrzemski had a pretty good idea where Johnny Bench was heading. Quote, I remember seeing Johnny at the 1969 All-Star game in Washington and thinking this guy was going to be in the Hall of Fame someday, Yastrzemski said. When results of this year's balloting were announced late Monday night, Yastrzemski and Bench became the 18th and 19th players elected in their first year of eligibility. The voting 336 votes needed. Johnny Bench, 431. Carl Yastrzemski, 423. Gaylord Perry, 304. Jim Bunning, 283. Ferguson Jenkins, 234. Orlando Cepeda, 176. Tony Oliva, 135. Bill Mazeroski, 134. Harvey Keene, 115. Maury Wills, 95, Jim Cott, 87, Ron Santo, 75, Ken Boyer, 62, Minnie Minoso, 59, Elroy Face, 47, Mickey Lolick, 47, Louis Tiant, 47, Joe Torre, 40, Dick Allen, 35, Beta Pinson, 33, Thurman Munson, 31, Bobby Bonds, 29, Curt Flood, 27, Sparky Lyle, 25, Bert Campaneris, 14, Wilbur Wood, 14, Manny Mota, 9, Bobby Mercer, 3, Don Money, 1, Gene Tennis, 1. Players receiving no votes were Jim Barr, Terry Crowley, Joe Ferguson, Woody Fryman, Cesar Geronimo, Dave Goltz, John Matlack, Rudy May, Blake McBride, Bill Robinson, and Richie Zisk. Bench was an all-star reserve catcher in his rookie season of 1968 and was named to the starting team in 1969 at age 22. In the 69 game at RFK Stadium, Bench went 2 for 3 with a home run and 2 RBI as the National League beat the American League 9-3. He had all the natural talent in the world, said Yastrzemski, who broke in with the Boston Red Sox in 1961. I always had to work extra hard because I wasn't born with all the natural talent, Yaz said. When their careers ended in 1983, Yastrzemski and Bench not only had Hall of Fame numbers, they had the image too. Yastrzemski finished with 3,419 hits and 452 home runs in 23 major league seasons. He was on 16 All-Star teams, won 6 Gold Gloves as the Red Sox left fielder, and won the American League MVP award in 1967 when he captured the Triple Crown and led Boston to a pennant. Yaz also holds the records for the most intentional walks, 190, the most at-bats, 11,988, and the most plate appearances, 13,990. Bench, who was a major cog in the Cincinnati's Big Red Machine, holds the record for most homers by a catcher with 327. Overall, he hit 389 home runs and won the Gold Glove as a catcher 10 times, while helping the Reds win the World Series in 1975 and 1976. There were 2 other outstanding candidates, pitchers Perry and Jenkins, on the ballot for the first time this year. Perry was 314, 265 for 8 major league teams in 22 seasons. He also had a 310 earned run average and 3,534 strikeouts. Jenkins had a record of 284, 226, and 3,192 strikeouts, but he also had a link to drugs. While with Texas, Jenkins was suspended from September 9th through the 25th, 1980, following his August 25th arrest in Canada on charges of cocaine possession. Last year, Pittsburgh's Willie Stargell became the 17th player elected in the first year of eligibility, and pitcher Jim Bunning was shy by 4 votes. Bunning won 100 games in the AL and the National League and also pitched a no-hitter in each league. This is from the Dayton Daily News, January 11th, 1989. Bench, a Technocrat, was cool perfection by Mark Bradley. It was easier to admire Johnny Bench than to love him. Admiration comes from the head, love from the heart. Johnny Lee Bench tugged at no heartstrings. He was too much the technocrat, too nearly perfect. To watch Pete Rose was to see a man playing a child's game and getting dirty doing it. To watch Johnny Bench was to see a man elevating a game to a science. Johnny Bench hadn't been in the big leagues 3 years when he coined the phrase that defined him, inner conceit. Inner conceit was knowing you were good at what you did. Bench was better than good. Bench was the best catcher ever. His first ballot admission to baseball's Hall of Fame, announced Monday night, was but further confirmation. On September 17, 1983, the Cincinnati Reds staged Johnny Bench Night, a final tribute to their hero. That night, the broadcaster Al Michaels, who when working for the Reds had described Bench's most monumental home run, ninth inning, Game 5, 1972, National League Playoffs, Dave Giusti pitching for Pittsburgh, credited Bench with redefining a position. Bench took catcher's gear, the alleged tools of ignorance, and made them gleam like surgical instruments. Whatever needed doing, he did on cue. A runner cut down, no problem. The plate blocked, stand clear, an opposite field homer coming right up. He made it look so routine as to seem effortless, and his dotage came to realize that. When I was younger, Bench said, I expected things to fall in place, and they did, very smoothly, very easily, maybe too easy to know how difficult it really was. Indeed, there was a coolness about Johnny Bench that kept him from being truly treasured, even in Cincinnati. Bench could be haughty, aloof, off-putting, the inner conceit showing through. Were he a skater, you'd have given him a perfect 6.0 for technical merit, a middling 5.1 for artistic impression. He simply did his job, did it better than anyone trotted to the dugout when it was done. Rose slid face first, spiked the ball, and duked out Bud Harrelson. Joe Morgan was a flame burning bright. Tony Perez, the beloved big doggy, kept everybody loose and spoke no known language. Those Reds expended conspicuousness, contagious effort. Nobody ever saw the clinical Bench sweat. For most of the 17 years Bench played in Cincinnati, those who saw him regularly took his icy excellence for granted. Only when his aching knees drove him to first base and third base, a position he played poorly, did Bench seem fallible and human, for him an uncomfortable station. On the day he announced his impending retirement, Bench said, I've tarnished some of what I accomplished. I don't want to bring it down any more. From the start, Johnny Bench knew his destiny. When they asked in the second grade what you wanted to be, I said Major League Baseball player. I wanted to set home run records and be the greatest catcher in history. Most kids become catchers because they're too fat or too clumsy to play the field. Bench took up the position fully intending to redefine it, and by the time he was old enough to vote, others could see that the kid from Bangor, Oklahoma, a mile half before resume speed, Bench would always say was an all-timer. On Johnny Bench night, the man himself told an overflow riverfront crowd, I am a very lucky person, very honored, very grateful. I couldn't wish this good. This is better than ever, more than good. You fans have made the day complete. I'm gonna try like hell to play good for you tonight. Then once on cue, he went out and hit a home run off Houston's Mike Madden, but as he rounded the bases, the bloodless Johnny Bench broke from character, lifting his right arm and pointing to the sky, and afterwards he said, at blessed last, I wish to make sure all the people knew it was for them. Game running catches out, Bench says, and this is from the same newspaper accounting. The way Johnny Bench sees it, there may not be too many more catchers in the Hall of Fame. Catching is changing, Bench said. I think we're running them catchers out of the ball game if we continue the balk rule and we continue to give them runners all the sorts of leverage on the base paths. Bench, who won 10 gold gloves as Cincinnati's catcher, and Boston's Carl Yastrzemski are the newest members of the Hall of Fame in a landslide election. Bench is the 13th catcher to be elected to the Hall of Fame, and he fears the game is now favoring the runner and running the catcher out of a job. You're not going to have great catchers. You're going to run them right out of the ball game because every emphasis now on the game today seems to be on speed, said Bench, who had a 990 fielding average in 16 seasons. Bench holds the National League record for most putouts, 9,260, and total chances 10,110. There were times, like when you played the Cubs, you really didn't have to warm your arm up very much because they weren't going to run. Now it's running, running, running in the game, and as a result, you're putting too much pressure on the catcher. As for Yastrzemski, he had to follow a legend, Ted Williams, who retired as Boston's left fielder following the 1960 season. Taking over Ted Williams' spot was the toughest thing I ever had to do. It almost broke me, really, Yastrzemski said. The first 3 months of the season, I really didn't know if I could play in the big leagues or not. Yastrzemski and everybody else soon found out he could. He has finished with 3,419 hits and 452 home runs. He was named to 18 All-Star games, won 6 Gold Gloves as Boston's left fielder, and captured the American League Most Valuable Player award in 1967 when he won the Triple Crown and led Boston to the pennant. Of all of his accomplishments, Yastrzemski is most proud of being the only American leaguer to have 3,000 hits and 400 home runs. I accomplished something no one else has ever done, Yastrzemski said. I'm very pleased and very proud of my accomplishments, but I'm most proud of that. Not Williams, not Gehrig, not DiMaggio did that. Before I get on to Johnny Bench here, I want to just talk about Yaz for a quick minute. And this is his 1967 Topps. It's actually one of my favorite cards in my collection. I'm not the biggest Yaz fan in the world, and I've heard a lot of good things about him and a lot of bad things about him too, by other ball players who played with and against him. So I'm not going to talk about what those players have stated. I'm not going to tell you even what I have noticed from Yaz as well. But in 1967, he won the Triple Crown, and the next Triple Crown that was won was by Miguel Cabrera in 2012. That's a huge expanse of time. And if you see all the Triple Crown winners of the 1930s and 1940s, you would kind of ask yourself in the back of your head, were the players from the 1930s better than the players of the 1960s and 70s? That's up to you guys to decide. It's a different era, obviously, but something is going on there because, again, from 67 to 2012, that's really a big expanse that you don't have a Triple Crown winner. And because he was a Triple Crown winner and an amazing year for the Red Sox, they went to the World Series. And the year prior, they were 100-game losers. So this 1967 Impossible Dream year is something that I've heard about by family members, by friends, by basically everybody who is from Boston and was around at that time. And same with 75 as well. And so uh, that one really came down to the wire in 7 games, and unfortunately they lost. So in 1968, he led the league with a 301 batting average, and you could consider it the year of the pitcher. And it's something also really kind of, I guess, I don't, it's not interesting because it's kind of sad. And a lot of people will say that either baseball was really bad in 1968, which I kind of disagree with that because if you look at the National League, that's not happening in the National League. But the pitcher's plate was moved, I think, forward. You guys can tell me exactly if I'm correct on that. I'd love to be corrected on this. But I know it was the year of the pitcher, and you had Bob Gibson, you had Denny McLain in the American, you had Bob Gibson, you had Denny McLain, you had Mickey Lolick, you had all these great pitchers. So it may have been really tough to be a hitter in 1968, 69, 1970, around there. So I wanted to bring that up. And also, a lot of people have said too that because he had a 23-year career, his numbers should be good. And they may have a point to that, in fact. Yaz, he's he's an interesting guy. I'm not gonna really kind of like dive into a lot of the good and a lot of the bad things that I've heard from other ball players. Because he again, I've had my instances with Yaz over the years, and you could write a book on Yaz, both good and bad. And I don't like to badmouth players. I don't like to badmouth people unless it's really justified. And you could say that some of the stuff is really justified with him. He is a chain smoker, by the way, and he's just kind of a very nervous guy. And there's probably reasons for that that I may not be aware of, or at least if I am, I'm not going to tell you guys why. But Yaz is still kind of popular. He's very quiet. I don't really see him all that often these days. I've seen him at a couple of autograph events, and he is actually very good to his fans too. So that's a plus for him. But I just say I'm not the biggest fan of Yaz, and I appreciate the fact that he is a Hall of Famer. Should he be a first ballot Hall of Famer? Uh, I'm not entirely convinced that he was, but again, there's two sides to every story, right? So anyway, so going to Johnny Bench now. I never met Johnny Bench. I heard a few things about him growing up, but I didn't know a whole lot. And those articles were really kind of eye-opening for me because I have heard that he is kind of a different personality when it comes to fans and dealers alike. And I'm actually going to take the side of the fan instead of the dealer because I know what dealers are about. It's okay too, and maybe fans too. But um, I don't know Johnny Bench's personality personally. I've heard stories, and you guys who have met Johnny Bench could probably tell me in the either tell me. Actually, you know what? If you guys have any stories that are not good, just email them to me and we can talk about it. Obviously, Johnny Bench is probably one of the greatest catchers of all time, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about his uh, his resume here. I also have two other cards that I didn't show you, and this is 1973 tops. Um, this for me is kind of 50-50. I bought it pretty cheap, and it's not as 1972. I'm not really a big fan of that, or a lot of his other cards. But I did get this because it's pretty cheap. And I've told you about the 73s. I've made fun of these, all the time. And I kind of like them now. Your tastes change over time, whether or not it be like food or clothing or music or baseball cards. And so um, I'm okay with this particular card, and it is kind of growing on me like moss. So it's okay. A lot of people have said that they don't like the photography in the 73 set, and this one is a little on the strange side. Obviously, if it didn't say bench or number 5 on the back, I wouldn't know who this is. So it's kind of a legitimate concern. And I'll show you the backs. And the back of the 1973 are really tough just because of that black border. So anyway, that was on the table, so I grabbed it, and I'm okay with that. This is the 1976 tops, really great looking card. It is still really cheap too. I think I paid like $10 for this card. You could probably get it for a little bit cheaper than that. But again, it's a great design and a great image of Johnny Bench. Now, Johnny Bench played from 1967 to 1983 for the Reds, and I broke down his playing career like this: 1,742 games as a catcher, 195 games at third base, 145 games at first base, and 112 games in the outfield. And Yogi Berra actually did this as well. So Berra was also a outfielder as well. and that was really to save his knees because being a catcher sucks. You can do it for only a short period of time, which is why a lot of the catchers said that they had multiple knee injuries and operations. So I was watching an interview years ago with Yogi Berra, Carlton Fisk, Gary Carter, and Johnny Bench, and all of those guys except for Berra had knee operations, multiple knee operations, especially Gary Carter, and he said he had a lot of other ailments along with his catching uh, directly because of that. And so a lot of these guys, they didn't remain as catchers for their entirety of their career, and it just is a number on your knees. And you know, me being a catcher in school, that was tough, and sometimes I'd play third base, and that sucked too. So you can actually see the entire field and kind of like direct everything that's going on the field, which I think is why a lot of catchers make really good managers. Anyway, he was a 14-time All-Star from 1968 to 1980, and again in 1983. And he was in the 1970 World Series versus Baltimore, 1972 World Series versus Oakland, the 1975 World Series versus Boston, and the 1976 World Series versus the New York Yankees. And he won the 1975 and 76 World Series. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for at least some of those. I don't want to see the 1975 World Series. I don't want to see the Red Sox lose. But anyway, so he was also a two-time MVP in 1970 and 1972, in the 1968 Rookie of the Year, and a 10-time Gold Glove recipient from 1968 to 1977, the two-time home run leader in 1970 and 72, which really kind of surprised me, and a three-time RBI leader, 1970, 72, and 74. And his number five was retired by the Reds, and he made the Major League Baseball all-time team, and the 1989 Hall of Fame induction was 96.4%. So that's really up there. I think obviously the Sandman has 100%, and then Tom Seaver I think was like 98%, and then you know bench here. So he's highly regarded as a player. At the time of his retirement, he held the record for most home runs hit by a catcher with 389, and he was the first catcher in history to lead the league in home runs. His single season record of 45 home runs in 1970 remained a record until 2021 when Salvatore Perez hit 48. I don't know who Salvatore Perez is because I don't watch baseball anymore, but I'll take them for their word for it. And Bench is on the record for saying that the 1970s Big Red Machine wouldn't or couldn't happen today because of the money associated with baseball, with the contracts. In 1976, with free agency, it made it more difficult to acquire ball players, and it jacked up all the prices for ball players in both American and National League. And so the Big Red Machine consisted of Pete Rose, Tony Perez, Joe Morgan, George Foster, Ken Griffey Sr., a very, very good ball player, by the way, as is his son, and Dave Concepcion. Sparky Anderson is the manager. Let's see, and obviously, free agency happened after the 1976 season, so that would have made it really impossible to kind of keep the Big Red Machine. And today, as Bench said, if you were to have a Big Red Machine, uh, you'd be paying out more money than the team actually has. So it couldn't be done today. So what's really interesting about this as well is in the 1970s they had all these great players on the Reds, and they won 2 out of 4 World Series. Now that you have a huge bankroll That doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to A, go into a World Series, and B, win the World Series. So I looked at another World Series that I saw, and that was the 1983 World Series, the Phillies versus the Orioles. And the Phillies, they had Joe Morgan, Pete Rose, Bo Diaz, Mike Schmidt, Tony Perez, uh, Vaughn Hayes, and who isn't going to win a World Series without Vaughn Hayes? And then Steve Carlton. And they ended up losing to the Orioles 4 games to 1. And the Phillies that year went 90 and 72, and the Orioles were actually, I think, were a little bit better team. They were 98 and 64, and they won over the Phillies. And so they had 5 Hall of Famers on that Phillies club. So just because you have a lot of Hall of Famers on your team doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get into a World Series and win it. And that was probably a major shock to Phillies fans there, because, and it's shock to me too, really. I again, I saw bits and pieces of that World Series. I saw the '84 World Series, which I thought was awesome. And I'm a little kid at that point, and I love the '84 Tigers. Anyway, I'm getting distracted now, but guys, I really wanted to tell you a little bit more about Johnny Bench and his time on the Reds and how he got into the Hall of Fame in 1989. And his cards are still very popular, by the way. And it's really kind of interesting that his cards have not really gone to the stratosphere as they did back in like 1989, 1990, 92 or so. There are other factors that actually may have caused his cards to be overinflated in the late 80s and early 90s. And we can discuss that at another point in time. But for today, I wanted to introduce you to Johnny Bench's career and a little bit about his life. There's actually a lot about his minor league career as well, which I thought was interesting. I didn't want to go overboard with this, but anyway, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I greatly appreciate it. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about Johnny Bench, his career, his cards. If you guys have any favorite Johnny Bench cards, let me know. And if you've ever met Johnny Bench, let me know about that too. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Anyway, I will talk to you later and have a good one. Bye.